Hi guys, in this episode of Shri series, we will be talking about straight line graphs, alright? So what I wanted to do was to give you guys a basic theoretical understanding of what we need to know when solving questions involving straight line graphs, alright? So in a nutshell, a straight line is any line in a graph, as it makes sense, that appears straight, alright? So let's say for instance, this is just a simple illustration of a graph. That's the origin. That's my y-axis. That's my x-axis. A straight line is any line that goes straight up like that. Could come this way or it could be that way. All right. Please remember, a straight line graph need not only be like that or like that, all right? It could also cross and cut across the axis, all right? So coming back to my basic definition, it's important that we understand key terminologies or key words when we are solving questions involving straight line graphs, all right? One of the most important things you need to understand is what's known as a line graph profile. What do we mean by that? So what I've done here is I've just sketched a simple graph, all right? So you've got your y-axis, or we call it your vertical axis, and you've got your x-axis or your horizontal axis. That's your origin, that's 0. So in a nutshell, obviously, if you look at here, both your x and y axis is positive. And if you go down here, what happens is your x values are positive, but your y values are negative. When you go here, what happens is your x values are negative and your y values are negative. And when you move up there, what happens is your x values are negative and your y values are positive. So it's in a nutshell, it's kind of like how we draw your integers, all right? So if you got a number line here, not the best draw number line, very bent when it's meant to be straight, so my apologies for that. Numbers here are positive and numbers here are negative. So it's pretty much like this here. So if you got your x-axis, numbers to your right are all positive and numbers to your left are negative. And if you look at your y-axis here, as you go above, your numbers are positive and you go below, your numbers are negative. All right. So let's get on to the key terminologies. All right. Now imagine I just draw a straight line like that. All right. What are the key words that we need to understand? All right. So the two words you need to understand, or should I say the key phrases you need to understand, are x and y intercept. All right. So if you look at this point here, that's your y axis. That is referred to as your y intercept. So your y-intercept is a point where the line cuts the y-axis. So it's intercepting, it's cutting in your y-axis. All right, so that's how you remember. So you look at your y-axis, look at that line, look at that point. That point is referred to as your y-intercept. If you look at this point here, that is referred to as your x-intercept. So what happens is an x-intercept is a point where the line cuts the x-axis. All right, so y-intercept and x-intercept. So those are the two words you need to understand because they will ask you when solving straight line graphs. In my next series of videos, we'll be solving questions involving x and y-intercept. So in a nutshell, y-intercept cuts the y-axis, x-intercept cuts the x-axis. Now, here's a trick. I like to use what's known as the rule of the opposite. So I'll write it down here, y-intercept and x-intercept. So this is one simple trick I tell students. It's called the rule of your opposite. So in your y-intercept, the value of x is 0. And in your x-intercept, the value of y is 0. All right, so in this bit here, the y-intercept, just remember the x-coordinate is 0. And if you look at your x-intercept, your y-coordinate is 0. So let's say, for instance, I draw a simple point like that. And let's say that's a line, that's my y, and that's my x. I put my y, and that's my x. And suppose that is 2. And let's say that is -3. Again, I'm just sketching, so it's not drawn to scale. So in this case, my y-intercept, because the value of x is equal to 0, that's going to be 0, 2. And my x-intercept In this case, y is going to be 0, so my x-intercept is -3, 0. So that reinforces my point that in your y-intercept, your x-coordinate is 0 and not your y-coordinate. In your x-intercept, the y-coordinate is 0 but not your x, and that's how you understand. All right, so we've talked about y-intercept, we've talked about x-intercept. All right, there's another concept I want to talk to you about, and that is referred to as your gradient. So I'll write it down here. So what is your gradient? All right, now there's two ways of calculating your gradient, and I know a lot of teachers use the concept of rise over run. All right, so in other words, it goes up and your run is from here to there. So that's what we refer to as rise over run. All right. However, as we further from year 9 onwards, we use what's known as the formula of your gradient, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. All right. So suppose we have 2 points. All right. We have 2 points. For instance, there's A, x1, y1. And we have B, x2, y2. So my gradient is going to be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. All right. The symbol that we use to find the gradient is referred to as m. All right. So I just wanted us to understand 3 basic points. One is your y-intercept, where the line cuts your y-axis, and at that point the value of x is 0. The other point I wanted you to understand is your x-intercept. At that point it cuts the x-axis and the value or the coordinate of y is 0. And the next point I wanted you to understand is a gradient, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. All right, and suppose you have 2 points, x1, y1, x2, y2. So I'm just substituting these numbers or putting these numbers generically. Your gradient is going to be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. In the next video, I'm going to be talking about the equation of a straight line, which is y is equal to mx plus c, where we're going to be doing more questions involving gradients, x-intercept and y-intercept. So stay tuned for the next set of videos on straight line, graphs and equations. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye now.